Welcome, folks. It's 9 o'clock and 13 seconds. Welcome to the program. We're not live on air yet, but we will be in about 4 minutes. So it's good to see you guys. Wow, everybody's been chatting it up over in the chat room. Master Finn, good to see you. Carly Sagan, good to see you. Roger Rabbit, come here. You can say hi because you're right here. There's Rowan. And no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. That's right, field guy. And you got that reference real quick. So let's see. This bird has ceased to be hello, Polly Parrot. Matthew Sainsbury, good to see you. And Doug Stack, Grumpy Stack. Sorry, giving away your new moniker there. I hope everybody knows you're Doug. Dave Potter's here. Uncle Dave's here. Why don't you say hi to Uncle Dave?
Hi, Uncle Dave.
So.
You should come over.
Yeah, he can. He can come over anytime.
You should come over and take me to another Chinese restaurant. And
oh, yeah.
We can
come over and take me to the Chinese restaurant.
We can leave him here and everybody else, and it can just be you and me because I'm amazing.
Oh, hold on. Hey, I need you to do me a favor because I'm getting echo now. Go around the backside and plug that in for me. So I don't have to shift anything around.
How is it echoing?
Because it's picking up the microphone. It's a different... see, I had you go back there so I didn't have to move the computer screen. All right. Let me reshift everything here, guys.
Yeah, well, you can take me out for dinner instead of anybody else. Leave everybody else. And
No, I said it first.
Okay. If you're going to argue here, get out. Bye. Hey, now. That's enough. Both of you.
Hit me first.
Okay, it's bedtime. Good night. I got a little over 2 minutes and we go live. So I don't need fighting and bickering going on behind me between you two.
I'm not fighting.
All right. Okay. We're getting there. Hey, girls. This is Uncle Dave.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. Now that you've said hi. Hey, Sarah Nichols. Now that you've said hi, I need you to go.
Dun, dun.
All right.
Fine.
When we're on air, you're out. Bye. Go. Quick. Quick. You're leaving me time to kick you in the butt. Okay, she's gone. All right. Roger Rabbit, good to see you. Michelle Kenham Free, good to see you. And we'll be hitting it live here in just a few minutes. Where's my sound? Oh, there we go. I got sound in my headset. So it'll be an interesting conversation tonight. Hey, Barbie D. Good to see you. And Master Finn, of course. Hey to the stowaways as well. Yes, yes. That's who they are. That's what they are. So, anyway, I got these on. I don't like having them on when I do radio, but I'm going to need them because I got notes to go by. Lots of stuff. Let's see if my notes are even up. What time we got? We got 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So we got about a half a minute before we go live. Let's see. Windows. Yep, my window is open over there. Okay. All right, guys, stand by because we're going to go dark for just a few seconds as we start this show in about 10 seconds. So I'm going to go dark now. Talk to you. I'll be back in a few seconds. Stand by.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAlanRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, AlanRoberts.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program tonight. This is Scotty Roberts, your host, over here at the Intrepid radio program, broadcasting to you live from Odyssey Radio. And you can go see the Odyssey Radio site at, guess what, odysseyradio.com. And that's ODYSY radio.com. And you can also view the video simulcast of this program over on our Facebook page, the Odyssey Radio Facebook page. And you can go see it over at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. I was going to say Mr. Scotty Roberts. I think both will get you there. And you can see it over there live. And there is a, a chat room going in both the Facebook page and over here on the YouTube. And I say over here because that's kind of where I reside during the show. Since there's only one person running the show, it's hard to be in two places at one time. So I'll glance over at the Facebook every now and then, but for the most part, I'm right here. So I want to welcome everybody here. I want to welcome all the Intrepids over on the chat room on the YouTube channel. Welcome to the program. And folks, if you are not a member of the Intrepid Radio or Scotty Roberts chat room over there on my YouTube channel, just hit the little join button down below and you'll see options for becoming a member. And I appreciate every one of you. Thank you for being here. And by the way, you can listen to the show all the time, whether you're a member or not. But it's always nice to have the members in there. And there are benefits, believe it or not, for being a member. We still have to figure those out. But there it is. So thank you for being here, everybody. I see some people over in the chat room. I just want to say, hey, David Castle, Paige Rockwell Sowie. I still don't know how to say your name, Suey. And also Niall Parkinson from Ireland is over there. Ryan Gale is in. Bruh, how you doing? And everybody else that we mentioned in the pre-show, there is a pre-show that goes on here. And so if you want to join that, and also when we go off air on Odyssey Radio, guess what? We stay on air at the YouTube channel for, it could go 5 minutes, it can go an hour and a half like it did one night. We just call that, there's a little after show. And I think it's been called The Captain's Cabin because I'm the captain. And so you can come to my cabin after the show and we'll have conversation that is probably of the sort that we can't do on public airwaves. So thanks for being here, everybody. You don't know how much I appreciate the fact that you take your time and spend it with me. So good evening to everybody out there. And, we're extending a bit of what we talked about last night, which was Hypatia of Alexandria, which led into talking about some atrocities committed by the church. Now, has the church committed atrocities down through the ages? Yeah, sure they have. You know why? Because it's populated by human beings. It's also populated by human beings who crave power and by people who crave to control other people. You would think the church would simply be populated by believers, people who in their hearts are followers of Christ or followers of Christianity. And that would govern the way they act. But no, in leadership, many times you had a lot of people in leadership that go in a different direction than the body is supposed to go. And you take a look at wars going on in our world right now, and you see leaders that will take their nations in different directions than the body of people want to go. And you always ask, well, why don't the people just rise up and change that? It's not an easy thing to say. Well, I take that back. It's not an easy thing to do. It's an easy thing to say. If you disliked what was going on in this country, in the United States, what would it take for the body of citizens to change that government out? It would take what happened in 1776 and following. It would take a revolution. Do you think most people out there working their day-to-day jobs in these other countries really want that? They really want war in their backyards and their front yards? So no, it's a hard thing for people to do. I want us to look at the church the same way. Now, I'm not a member of the organized Catholic Church. I'm not a member of any organized Christian church right now. I was in a very conservative fundamentalist Baptist setting when I did all of my schooling. And I went into the evangelical free church because it believed the same tenets of the faith, but they weren't as legalistic in their approach, to say it in a word. Yeah, I could get into a debate, I'm sure, with people in both those styles of churches. It was a style of governance, a style of belief. Now, I would take it to say the topic that we covered last night with Hypatia, the murdering of Hypatia by the monks of the Christian church that were set upon her by Cyril, the Archbishop of Alexandria, in the early 400s AD, early 400s AD. And Cyril, who went on to become a saint of the church, despite all the anti-Semitism that he expressed, all the fighting against and murdering of Jews, and the fighting and murdering of pagans like Hypatia of Alexandria, because they did not like the way that she taught. And I'm oversimplifying it, but that's basically what happened. They dragged her from her chariot, beat her to death. Well, they took her into the church, stripped her, and beat her to death, then burned her. Why, thank you, Rainey. My wife delivering a drink. And so they beat her to death, and they burned her, and they flayed all of her skin off of her. Why? Because Cyril, the Archbishop of Alexandria, wanted to have control of the populace. He wanted to control the governor there, who was a dear friend of Hypatia's, and they had constant conflict. He had sent squads out to assassinate the governor, Osestris. And so all of these things were taking place, but you look at that and you say, why would the church engage in something like this? Why would the church want to kill people because they stood against their message? Would you be drawn to what I believe if you knew that I murdered people who didn't believe what I taught? I would have a problem with that. And so I wanted to take a little spin off of that and talk a little bit about violence in the organized Christian church. And when I talk about the organized Christian church, I am usually referring to the literalist Orthodox Christian church, which rose up in the first 2 centuries after the time of Christ. And of course, they became the organized Roman Catholic Church by the late 200s. Page says, Scotty, nightmares. Yeah. Grumpy Stack says, ostriches? Were you not here last night, Grumpy? Osestris was the guy. Niles says, I think anyone placed in a position of absolute authority will lose all sense of moral sensibility. And the sad thing is that they would never understand why. You're right, Niall. I think people that are in these positions that have an absolute control over a populace, they will lose touch with, well, good night, Rainey. There's my wife wandering through the room very temptingly. And so I can say that on radio. It's my show. You don't like that? I'm sorry. But I love my wife. My wife's a beautiful woman. And when my wife walks through the room half clothed, then you know what? I take notice. So even if it's right in the middle of a radio show that's broadcasting live on air. So I want to thank my wife for being here and being part of the live studio audience. So Leslie Holker says, Rainey is hot. There you go, Rainey. That was for you. Over there in the peanut gallery. She's doing something. I don't think she even hears what I'm saying. So lose touch of morality. Yeah, that's true when you're in those positions of power, Matthew Sainsbury. And I think this is what happened in the church as well. And I wanted to cover some of that. Now, if you saw the graphic for tonight's show, I'm going to call it up because I know Matt Finn had said something early on before the show was on, mentioning the quote that I put up there. And I put tonight's show, Bellum Sacrum in Latin, which basically means holy war. And the statement is attributed, and I asked this question in the title, the statement attributed to Jesus, I come not to bring peace, but a sword. Was it a call for Christianity to wage violence against non-believers? And I know Matt Finn had a question about that. And of course, just looking at that show, it's meant to be provocative, that show graphic, that title. I want it to be provocative to draw people into asking that question. Did that verse where Jesus says, I've come to not bring peace, but a sword. If you take that sentence alone out of context, it can mean something very different than what it was written to mean. And you can attribute it to Jesus. You can maybe not even believe Jesus existed, but to his early followers, whoever it was, I happen to believe Jesus existed. I think he may have said this. It was recorded this way. Maybe. I have my things I have questions about. But I wanted to first, before we did anything else, I wanted to look at the context of that particular verse. So I've called it up here. And I could share this with you on my screen, but my StreamYard has been acting wonky about sharing the screen. And those who are listening audibly only over at the radio station, you're not going to be able to see this. So I'm going to read this for you. And I chose to read the whole chapter. It comes out of Matthew chapter 10, one of the four Gospels. And I am reading from a version of the Bible, which is not the King James only version, or the King James, the KJV, the King James. I do not believe in KJV, King James only. There are groups of believers out there that believe the only way you can read God's word is by reading the King James Bible. And they're militant about it. To me, would those be the same people who 1,700 years ago would kill people for not believing the way they believed? These are questions we have to ask because people get so militant about their belief system, and they did it in Christianity as well, that it leads to atrocity. Let's look at this. Matthew chapter 10, and I take it from The Message, which is not interpretation, it's a translation of the New Testament from Koine Greek and Aramaic into modern idiom as we would speak today. So let me read this to you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pull this out a little bit so I can close that window down and I can still see the chat room over there as I read this. Now, here is how it's written. It says this: the prayer was no sooner prayed than it was answered. Jesus called 12 of his followers and sent them into the ripe fields. He gave them the power to kick out evil spirits and to tenderly care for the bruised and hurt lives. And first of all, does that sound like someone who would endorse murdering people who didn't believe in him? He sent them out. And remember, this is translated into modern idiom, modern English, instead of 1611 English. He gave them the power to kick out the evil spirits and to tenderly care for the bruised and hurt lives. This is the list of the 12 he sent. Simon, who they called him Peter, or Rock, is what that means. Rocky would be his nickname nowadays. Simon Peter. Andrew, his brother. James, Zebedee's son. John, his brother. Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the taxman, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, Judas Iscariot, who later turned on Jesus. That's what the note says there. So Jesus sent his 12 harvest hands out with this charge: don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers. And don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost. Go to the confused people right here in your own neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick. Raise the dead. Touch the untouchables. Kick out the demons. You've been treated generously, so live generously. And don't think you have to put a fundraising campaign before you start. You don't need a lot of equipment. You are the equipment. You are the equipment. And all you need to keep that going is 3 meals a day. Travel light. And remember, this is translated into modern day English. So, and I fell in love with these scriptures when I was in school, and I loved the message. They came out maybe a few years after I was in school. And then Jesus goes on and he says to them, when you enter a town or a village, don't insist on staying in a luxury inn. Get a modest place with some modest people. Be content there until you leave. Listen to how his commands to his disciples going out to minister to people is so different from the prosperity gospel that you hear nowadays. You deserve a limousine. You deserve a 5-star hotel. God wants you to have these things. What a contrast. So he says, travel light. When you knock on a door, be courteous in your greeting. Does that sound like violence? If they welcome you, be gentle in your conversation. If they don't welcome you, quietly withdraw. Don't make a scene. Shrug your shoulders. Be on your way. You can be sure that on Judgment Day, they'll be mighty sorry. But it's no concern of yours now. So Jesus preached, he taught his own disciples, there's consequences for disbelief. He said, but that's not your business. There's the first hint you get at this verse about the sword that I quoted in the opening, or in the graphic for the show. He says, stay alert. This is hazardous work I'm assigning you. You're going to be like sheep running through a wolf pack. So don't call attention to yourselves. Don't call attention to yourselves. Be as shrewd as a snake, inoffensive as a dove. Is murdering somebody for not believing inoffensive as a dove? Don't be naive, he goes on. These are all the words of Jesus, as listed by Matthew. Don't be naive. Some people will question your motives. Others are going to smear your reputation just because you believe in me. Don't be upset when they haul you before the civil authorities. Without knowing it, they've done you and me a favor, given you a platform for preaching the kingdom news. And don't worry about what you'll say or how you'll say it. The right words will be there. The Spirit of your Father will supply the words. Now, keep in mind, I want you to know, remember at this point in Jesus' ministry, he was preaching that he was ushering in the kingdom of God. Okay? That's the context of what he's talking about. When people realize it is the living God you're presenting and not some idol that makes them feel good, they're going to turn on you. Even people in your own family will turn on you. There's a great irony here. Proclaiming so much love, experiencing so much hate, but don't quit. Don't cave in. It's all well worth it in the end. It's not success you're after in such times, but survival. Be survivors. Before you've run out of options, the Son of Man will have arrived. That's an interesting sentence. Isn't he the Son of Man? Something else he's talking about. So he goes on, Jesus. He says, a student doesn't get a better desk than her teacher. A laborer doesn't make more money than his boss. Be content, pleased even, when you, my students, my harvest hands, get the same treatment that I get. If they call me the master, Master Dungface, or shithead, we might say, what can the workers expect? If they're calling me those names, what are you going to expect, he said. Don't be intimidated. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open, and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threats of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. Save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, body, and soul in his hands. These were the teachings of Jesus. And he goes on. We're getting to this verse that I used in the title of tonight's show. He says, what's the price of a pet canary? Some loose change, right? And God cares what happens to it, even more than you do. He pays even greater attention to you, down to the last detail, even numbering the hairs on your head. So don't be intimidated by all this bully talk. You're worth more than 1,000,000 canaries, he says to his disciples. Stand up for me against the world, against world opinion, and I'll stand up for you before my Father in heaven. If you turn tail and run, do you think I'll cover for you? Don't think I've come to make life cozy. Here it is now. Don't think I've come to make life cozy. I've come to cut, make a sharp knife cut between son and father, daughter and mother, bride and mother-in-law. Cut through these cozy domestic arrangements and free you for God. Well-meaning family members can be your worst enemies. If you prefer father or mother over me, you don't deserve to be with me. If you prefer son or daughter over me, you don't deserve me. Now remember, he's talking about deep commitment to somebody they believed was the Son of Man, the Son of God. If you don't go all the way with me through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. We are intimately linked in this harvest work. Anyone who accepts what you do accepts me, the one who sent you. Anyone who accepts what I do accepts my Father, who sent me. Accepting a messenger of God is as good as being God's messenger. Accepting someone's help is as good as giving someone help. This is a large work I've called you into, but don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. Give a cool cup of water to someone who's thirsty, for instance. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice of mine. You won't lose out on a thing. Now that's the whole context of that verse that we were talking about that I used that said, where Jesus said, I come not to bring peace but a sword. Guys like Oliver Cromwell is a prime example. He used that verse, that portion of everything I just read you. He used that sentence, I come not to bring peace but a sword. He used that against the Roman Catholic Church. He used that to justify killing members of the Roman Catholic Church in the name of Protestantism. That's what Oliver Cromwell did. So the reason I put that verse in there, in that header, was to draw you in to ask the questions, to be provoking and thought-provoking. Because if you go down to what Jesus taught about being a follower of him, now, listen, I don't have to be a follower of Jesus or even believe in Christianity to say, well, this is what the guy who founded Christianity, so to speak, the titular head of Christianity, this is what he had to say. And this is what I want you to recognize here, is that look at all that Jesus said in that. He had some spiritual sides of it. Said, hey, if you get rejected, don't worry about it. Those people will have to deal with God on that later. You deal with the here and the now. And he said, give in my name. Look at all the things he said there. And when he brought up anything about the sword, which in the 1611 version, the King James version was, I come not to bring peace, but a sword, that sentence goes on. In this version, Jesus said, I didn't come here to help you get cozy. I came here to show you the knife, the sword, the cutting edge that will divide you from the rest of the world. It will divide you from family. It will divide you from the people that are closest to you, if you truly stand for who I am. So this is what he was saying. And I thought I better get that out of the way first. I could have said that probably a lot quicker, but I wanted you to hear the whole context of what was said there. And so with all of that in mind, let me look over into the chat room for a second. I just want to see if there's anything here. Matt Finn said, sadly, to follow the doctrine of Christ, you may end up losing unbelieving family members in the process. That's true. And I would say that's probably in any faith structure. You may end up losing family members. What if you come from a Christian family and you decided, I'm pagan, or I'm Christian pagan, or Christo-pagan? We've talked about that a lot on this show over the years. And I said, what if I'm Christo-pagan? You may lose your Christian family. I know I loved this family deeply, but my first wife, I was married for a few years in the early 1980s. We had no kids. We got divorced. She came from a very strong Baptist family. And that divorce was enough to take some of her family and turn them against her. She no longer has a place at the table of God. And it was just miserable the way they treated her over it. Now, she and I, we didn't talk for 19 years. She turned her back on a lot of things in life. She's the one I've talked to you about who 19 years after our divorce, which was in 1988, so in 2007, the year Rainey and I got married, she called me out of the blue and said, I'll bet you don't know who this is. And I recognized her voice after 19 years. And I said, I'll bet you I do. And we had a good talk. And then she's become a dear friend of Rainey's and mine. We don't see much of her these days. And she even came and visited me when I was in the hospital with my open heart surgery 5 years ago. She was there. She came and sat with me for a couple of hours and just talked, as drugged up as I was. And so now we believe totally different things. We're on different pages of the way we practice life. But we still had good times and good talks. And she even said after the fact, she said, it's so nice to have regained somebody who was once my very best friend. And that's the way we proceeded. But I will tell you something. that kind of division doesn't just happen when somebody becomes Christian and their family doesn't like it. There are also, it works the other way around too. So Morgan Snow, good to see you. Good evening, she says, everyone in the chat room. And let's see, who else we got? I need a gaggle of 420, says Grumpy Stack. Good for you, brother. So welcome to everybody who's still filtering into the chat room. I'm glad you're here. And so those of you on air, what do you think of this stuff so far? If it sounds like I'm preaching to you, I'm not. We're talking about Christianity, and the main topic is talking about, because we came off of Hypatia of Alexandria last night, we're talking about the fact that Christianity has, I'm looking for the right word, not evoked or invoked, or they have practiced violence down through the ages. And remember, if you're long enough in this show, 2+ years ago, when we were talking about Gnosticism, early Christianity in the 1st century and into the 2nd century was a very different Christianity than we know today. That's because who rose up was the literal Orthodox Christianity, those who followed the letter of the law, those who, and then you had the Gnostics saying, no, this Jesus was a mystery. It's different, and they had conflict over it. But as the literalist Orthodox Church began to grow, they started to wage war against Gnostic Christianity. And what's funny is that it eventually flip-flopped, and Rome became, the state religion under Constantine became Christianity. But without getting to all the minutiae of history that led up to that, there was a lot of death, a lot of killing, a lot of persecution of non-Christians because they didn't accept the message of the love of Christ, which I find very paradoxical. When we look at Cyril of Alexandria, who had Hypatia of Alexandria murdered, who burned down the pagan school, the Library of Alexandria, was one of the main protagonists behind that, or antagonist, however you want to look at him. Matt Finn says Rome basically formed what we know of Christianity today. That's true. You had the Apostle Paul, who I believe very early on hijacked Christianity. And so the Christianity we see practiced more today in churches, Christian churches across America especially, is Pauline Christianity. And there were several different types of Christianity at the time. Hey, Brianna Learman, welcome. This is what I'm getting at then, that the church itself became this machine of violence against those who did not believe the same way. Christians have held diverse views towards violence and nonviolence all throughout time, and well, since the inception of Christianity. And currently and historically, there have been 4 views and practices within Christianity toward violence and violence in war. Now, I'm focusing a bit on war. Remember, I used the Latin words in the graphic for tonight's show, bellum sacrum, which simply means holy war. And so we're talking a bit about war, but we're going to get into more of the injustice and the violence perpetrated by the church. But there were 4 practices there within Christianity. There was non-resistance, there was Christian pacifism, just war, and preventative war, holy war, or the Crusades. And so the early church in the Roman Empire adopted this non-violent stance when it came to a war, since imitating Jesus's sacrificial life was preferable. And so the concept of just war, whereby limited uses of war were considered acceptable, originated with earlier non-Christian Roman and Greek thinkers such as Cicero and Plato. And so this theory was adapted later by Christian thinkers such as St. Augustine, who, like other Christians, borrowed much of the justification from Roman writers like Cicero and Roman law. And even though a just war, I don't mean only war, I mean a justified war, justifiable war, just war, that concept was widely accepted early on, and warfare wasn't regarded as a virtuous activity. And expressing concern for the salvation of those who killed enemies in battle, regardless of the cause for which they fought, was common. And concepts such as holy war, whereby fighting itself might be considered a penitential and spiritually meritorious act, didn't emerge before the 11th century. So you look at the Bible. The Bible contains several texts which encourage, command, condemn, reward, and punish, regulate, and describe acts of violence. You see it all through the Old Testament. You saw violence that God commanded. Let's see, Matt Finn, I'm looking at some of the things you're saying. It's not the doctrine of Christ. It's totally different than the teachings and in the Byzantine Empire, mixed with Rome's pagan roots and traditions. Yeah, you're right. And let's see. Oh, I was looking at some other comments in here. I'll throw them up and we'll talk about them as I see them. Matthew Sainsbury said Plato even felt women should be treated equally, I believe. Yeah, he did. Remember, Hypatia of Alexandria, she was a Neoplatonist. She believed and taught the philosophies of Plato. And she was a woman in a man's place in that society. So, yeah, Plato taught those things. She was a Neoplatonist, the new Platonic thinkers. And so as we go on here with this whole thing about Christianity and violence, I'm looking at some things I want to skip over because I'm mentioning some scholars who did some work on this stuff, and I don't want to get into that for tonight's show. Nobody's taking notes anywhere anyway on this, but I see here I've got a note on Mahatma Gandhi. He embraced the concept of nonviolence, which he found in both Indian religions and the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus, which he then utilized in his strategy for social and political struggles. Now, I am not one of those that, even when I was in the church, that believed in the social gospel, we called it, which was you got to feed people, you got to care for them, and so on. But these were a lot of Jesus concepts. I had mimicked this saying. I don't know where I first heard it, but I said, if we're out there trying to convert people to Christ, I said, what if they're starving? I said, most people don't want to convert to a different religion when their stomachs are empty. I said, I don't see there's anything wrong. I knew a lot of missionaries that started with the medical mission stations, things like that. So the social gospel, if you will. So according to the view of many historians, the Constantinian shift, Emperor Constantine, turned Christianity from a persecuted into a persecuting religion. Remember, it was Constantine, the Emperor of Rome. He was one who in 325 AD convoked the Council of Nicaea. He made himself the first pope of the Christian church. Some people say it was Peter. In the structure we understand, in the early 300s, it was Constantine who made himself the first pope of the Christian church, the first ruler of the church. He said, one emperor, one empire equals one God, one religion. That's what he pushed for. beginning at least with Constantine's conversion, such as it was, the followers of the crucified Christ have perpetuated gruesome acts of violence under the sign of the cross. And over the centuries, the seasons of Lent and Holy Week were, for the Jews, times of fear and trepidation. Muslims also associate the cross with violence. Crusaders' rampages were undertaken under the sign of the cross. And we can justify those actions all we want. And sometimes there were justifications for some of what they did, but for the most part, they were feared. The statement attributed to Jesus, "I come not to bring peace, but to bring a sword," has been interpreted by some as a call to arms for Christians. But as we saw just by reading the text of that entire chapter where we find that sentence, that's not the context of the phrase at all, of the sentence at all. So the bloody history of the tradition of despite the tenets of love and peace and all of that, Christianity, like most traditions, has always had a violent side. And despite the bloody history of that tradition has provided disturbing images. Violent conflict is vividly portrayed in the Bible. And this history and these biblical images have provided the raw material for theologically justifying the violence of contemporary Christian groups. For example, here's some good modern examples for you. Attacks on abortion clinics. The murder of an abortion doctor a few years ago, I remember this when it happened, by groups claiming to be Christian groups, have been viewed not only as assaults on a practice that Christians regard as immoral, but also as skirmishes in a grand confrontation between forces of good and evil that has social and political implications, sometimes referred to as spiritual warfare. Higher law has been used to justify the violence of Christians. Historically, according to René Girard, many Christians embraced violence when it became the state religion of the Roman Empire, beginning with Constantine. Christianity triumphed at a level of the state and soon began to cloak with its authority persecutions similar to those in which the early Christians were victims. And this is Dave Potter says, "I have 2 barrels of swords. I'm very godly." And when he says barrels, no, swords don't come in barrels. Dave has big barrels, open topped, and he's got all the swords stuck down in them. And so he's got 2 barrels full of them. I've got 4 up on the wall, and I have several machetes and hatchets and knives and daggers and skein-dus and dirks and things like that as well. So I'm a simple man. A shelter, clothes, food, drink, I'm good. There you go, Steve. So you're not out murdering in the name of God, which is a good thing. So there was a point I wanted to make before I moved on. Now I've lost it, the point. So let's just move on. We've got about roughly 8 minutes left of this episode tonight. So I was going to talk about war and pacifism and Christians' involvement in war. There are some Christians who sincerely believe if I'm going to teach a message of love, I can't in good conscience kill somebody I don't know. If I believe that person might be lost spiritually, who am I to take their life? And that's the way some people think. And that's just fine. I was going to go on and talk a little bit more about just war and holy war. And the thing about holy war, might I say this, the consensus among Christians on the use of violence has changed radically since the Crusades were fought. The just war theory, the justifiable war, prevailing for most of the last 2 centuries, that violence is an evil which can in certain situations be condoned as the lesser of evils. And by the way, this is written by Jonathan Smith, Catholic Education Resource Center. The just war theory prevailing for most of the last 2 centuries, that violence is an evil which can, in certain situations, be condoned as the lesser of evils. It's a relatively young theory, he says, although it's inherited some elements, the criteria of legitimate authority, just cause, right intention, etc., 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 from the older war theory that first evolved around 400 AD. It's rejected 2 premises that underpinned all medieval just wars, including crusades. First, that violence would be employed on the behalf of Christ's intentions for mankind and could be directly authorized by God himself. And second, that it was a morally neutral force, which drew whatever ethical coloring it had from the intentions of the perpetrators. And that was the view of somebody who writes for the Catholic Church. That was the view that people had. Then there was genocidal warfare, the biblical account of Joshua, the Battle of Jericho. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. So Joshua, the Battle of Jericho, justified genocide in the name of God. It was used by, as I mentioned earlier, Oliver Cromwell to justify genocide against Catholics. Daniel Shiro, a professor at Russian and Eurasian Studies at the University of Washington, interprets 1 Samuel 15:1 to 15:3 as the sentiment so clearly expressed that because a historical wrong was committed, justice demands genocidal retribution, he said. I'm not going to look up the verses. You can look that up in Samuel 15. So probably where David was told by God to wipe everyone out in these villages. Then there's the Inquisition. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Good old Monty Python line. Dave Potter says, God doesn't ask man to kill other men. Men ask men to kill other men in God's name. Perfect way to say that, Dave. He also said a good swordsman always introduces himself. You never want to kill anyone you don't know. Isn't that the truth? And Dave taught me that when he taught me how to sword fight. The sword master that he is, many years ago. Pushing 30 years ago, Dave. Niall Parkinson, I just want to see what you have to say. Vocal and justified apparent violence became hidden, unspoken, and distorted violence upon the vulnerable within 500 years. You're right. That's exactly what happened. And going back into this, the Inquisition was a group of institutions within the judicial system of the Catholic Church whose aim was to combat heresy. Let's fight heresy. Heretic, we must fight you. We must diminish heresy in the church. And heresy was whatever they decided to call heresy or heretical. Galileo was called a heretic because he said the earth revolved around the sun, not the sun around the earth. Imagine that. And he was a heretic that could have faced the flames under the Inquisition, but he recanted. That famous line of his, where he said, I'm trying to remember exactly how he said it. He said, of all these, I hitherto do recant all these teachings he had. He says, nevertheless, it turns. He's talking about the earth. And so the Spanish Inquisition is often cited in popular literature. History is an example of Catholic intolerance and repression. The total number of people who were processed by the Inquisition throughout its history was approximately 150,000 heretics. So if you said, I don't know if I believe in all these teachings of the church anymore, I think I'm going to go back to my paganism, you could be burned at the stake as a heretic. So you couldn't just be free to go choose your own religion. If you didn't believe what the church taught about baptism, if you believe, I believe the scripture says it differently, you could be a heretic and burned at the stake or drowned. We'll baptize you now with a stone around your neck. So the approximate total would be about 3,000 of them were put to death. Nevertheless, it's likely that the actual death toll was higher, much, much higher. Keeping in mind the data provided by Dedieu and Garcia Sarcel for the tribunals of Toledo and Valencia. And it's likely that between 3,000 and 5,000 people were executed. And about 50 people were executed by the Mexican Inquisition. The Mexicans, they had their own Inquisition. Included in that total are about 29 people who were executed as Judaizers between 1571 and 1700. And out of 324 people who were prosecuted for practicing, of all things, the heretical Jewish religion. Jesus was a Jew, by the way. He wasn't a Christian. And I could go on and talk about the Portuguese, but we're running out of time. We have so little time left. We'll maybe talk about this a little more. I wanted to get to Christian terrorism, which I got no time for. We got to get out of here. So, folks, you know what? I'm going to tell you right here and now, live long and prosper. Stick around. There's more to come.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
And I'm back. And we are going off air. We have gone off air over on the radio station. So we're free to talk a little bit here and now. And I think we might be having one of our old neighbors, an old friend of ours, coming by even this late. She had called 3 minutes before the show started and wondered if I had a CD-ROM disk drive she could borrow. And so then I had to turn her over to Rainey. I said, work it out with Rainey. You can come over tonight if you want. And so she might stop by and pick that up. I told her after 10 o'clock when we're done with the radio portion of the show. So, guys, you can see there is so much information in this this whole thing about Christian persecution. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way. That's the way my mind was going. Not Christian persecution. I'm trying to unplug. I've got so much junk in the way. I can't reach the backside of my computer. There we go. Boom.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Not sure what that's doing. Hold on, folks. I'm getting feedback, and I shouldn't have any. So hang on. I haven't had any all week anyway. Did I not get that shut off properly? Let's find out. No, I didn't. Boom. Now it's off. That's why. About a minute and 20 seconds late turning off. That wasn't being broadcast. It was just, I was hooked up to the server still. So let me make sure all my buttons are switched off. That's gone. That's gone. That's gone. There we are. Now we're here. So that whole thing, this whole topic is a big topic, and it's a disturbing topic. Niall said Jesus the mystic never promoted going out in groups. And see, we don't know that for sure. We think that because of the mysticism and the Gnosticism and so on. Was that something his followers promoted more than he did? And that's where the confusion comes in. It's trying to parse all this stuff and figuring out what is there a history. No, the only history you have is the Gospels. The problem, and I went through that. We had a whole series of shows we did 6 months ago, more than that, a year ago, on all the writings and all the Gospels. So I can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. There you go, Dave. Yeah, I somehow clicked that on. when I was unplugging everything. So it was divided with Jacob's sons. What was divided with Jacob's sons? Anyway, not that the topic is enjoyable fare, that there's all this great enjoyable content there. I think it's interesting content. It's educational. It's good to know these things. It's good to understand where we came from. And so the big question is, I used to ask, if there's nothing to any of this, then why did God allow it to happen? And the answer would be, well, the devil has control over this world, and he's the one who did these things. And I would counter with, well, so God wasn't powerful enough to stop the devil from doing things? That makes no sense to me. Or it's like the book of Job in the Old Testament. Satan came and accused Job, and God said, you do whatever you want to Job. He won't falter. So they played games. The gods played games with human beings. I had a tough story with that. Niall is telling a little story here. Can I tell you a story about the mother and baby names? In Ireland between 1930 and 1970, 800 babies were buried. Some were stillborn, most were unsold. Okay? He's going to go somewhere with that, I think. See where he's going with that story. Israel, says Matt Finn. The brothers never got along and division grew from there. Yes, according to the biblical story, it was Jacob and Esau, the two sons of Israel. The two sons of Isaac. And Jacob was just another name for Israel. So it was Jacob, Israel, and Esau. And they were the fathers of two nations, the Jewish nation. And this is according to, now is this etiology? Is this a way that, were these real people who were the fathers and the founders of these nations? According to the biblical text, they are. But is it etiology? Is it a story, a myth that's told to help people understand certain things? Jacob and Esau. Jacob, we talked about this once a couple of weeks ago, just in passing, how Jacob stole the birthright from his older brother Esau. They were twins, but it said Esau's hand came out first, and they tied a red cord around it, the hand, and he drew his hand back in, and Jacob came out, but then Esau again. And so they considered Jacob to be the firstborn. And Esau to be the firstborn. He had the birthright coming. Well, Jacob finds a way to wrangle it, this stupid skit they play like you see in bad sitcoms. You know, his brother's a hunter and a big, ruddy man, a hairy man, and Jacob's more fine-boned and vegetables, things like that. And so his mother wants him to have the birthright. And so she helps him disguise himself as Esau, because his father, Isaac, is pretty much blind by this point in his old age. And so Jacob comes in disguised as Esau and tries to disguise his voice, I think, a bit, probably. Serves his father, asks for the birthright. And Isaac is like, and he feels his arms, and he had tied sheepskins to his arms, so his arms felt woolly and hairy. I don't know if that would work, even if I was blind, but this is the story. And he says, well, the arm and the hair is the hair of my son Esau, but the voice is of my more delicate son Jacob. And so he convinces him somehow, and he goes ahead and gives him the birthright. Then Jacob comes, or Esau comes storming in later and wants his birthright. And he says, my son, I've already given it to you. And a big fight, as you can imagine. So Niall's story goes on here. The children who were not sold to adoption or were stillborn, and any with obvious deformities, were killed and buried. The nuns in the Catholic Church. This is in Ireland, not long ago, 50 years ago. And Matt Finn said, yes, Jacob sold his birthright. Or Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob came in from a bad stint of hunting. He was starving to death. And he says, give me some of that stew you're making. I'm starving. And Jacob said, I'll let you have some stew, pottage. It was a vegetable stew of some kind. And he said, I'll let you have some. Give me your birthright, and I'll feed you. Esau's like, what the heck? What the fuck? He says, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm not on air anymore. And so he gives in. He goes, yeah. You can have the birthright. Give me something to eat before I die. And that's why Jacob goes in. If he sold his birthright and it was a legal transaction, all Jacob would have had to do is go into his dad, say, hey, Esau sold me his birthright. But for some reason, his dad wasn't going to buy it. So he went in and tricked his father for the blessing. That's right. And let's see. Niall's story says, this is the period we call the laundries. The unmarried mothers were made to wash laundry for local hotels. These were mothers out of wedlock. And this is, the church was in control of this in Ireland, right, Niall? So Matthew says, Laban deceived Jacob several times until he got his Rachel. That's true. That's what happened. Hey, is Heather coming over tonight? No? Oh, yeah. Okay. And so I'm probably going to go when she gets here. So we'll converse for a little bit. And so, yeah, that's pretty tragic, Niall. You and I should talk about more about that. I want to hear more about that. And so, Jacob tricked his brother out of his birthright, then tricked his father out of the birthright. Because Isaac probably wouldn't have gone along with that deal. What? You made Esau give you his birthright for a bowl of pottage? Nah, I don't think so. His dad probably would have canceled that one. But that's probably why he had to trick his dad. Total control by the church, Niall said. That's pretty sad. That's a sad story. Let's see. Very painful period of Irish history. And it's recent. We think of the painful parts of Irish history being older. Well, they weren't. So, and this is another example of church control over people. So, anyway, we're going to revisit this whole topic again tomorrow night about violence from within the church toward those who don't believe. We'll talk about it some more. If you guys have some topics, too, you want to talk about, let me know. And I'd put up the call-in number again for tonight. But, and it is down below, in all the matter below. But I don't think we're going to have much time for that tonight. So I'm going to have to blast off of here with Rainey, and we've got a friend stopping over. So, Matt Finn says it was two different things. Birthright from his brother, blessings from his father. Oh, there you go. You're right. The blessing, the birthright. He sold his birthright, but the birthright had to be passed on through the blessing, through the father. And so, yeah, it was just deceit all the way around. Jacob was a conniver and an operator. Let's put it that way. So when Jacob ended up with the wrong wife, takes her to the wedding bed, finds out it's the sister who had crossed eyes or something like that. And he was pissed off about that. But you know what? He got operated on by Laban. So there we go. All right, guys. You know what? Yes. Yes, Dave Potter. How'd you know that? So, private conversation on the side. So, yes, Leah was her name, Matthew. Food for thought, says Niall. I can see what I said has struck you, but it's all true. It's all true. I believe you, brother. All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to call it quits for tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. I appreciate the fact that you're here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being in the chat. We'll be back in about a 22.5-hour break. We'll be back. So sit tight. And in the meantime, live long and prosper.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.